Good evening and welcome to Prime Business with me, Emma Davis. A look at our stories. The Bank of Ghana has opted for a more cautious cut in its policy rate. This was after it reduced the rate at which it lends to commercial banks to 29%. George Rafe has more from the Monetary Policy Committee meeting press engagement today.
This is the first time since July 2023 that the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana has moved to reduce its policy rate by 100 basis points. Addressing journalists at the press conference in Accra today, Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison, gave reasons why it had to go down by this margin.
We are trying to manage two things, looking at sticking to our core mandate of bringing inflation down, and at the same time being mindful of the need to give a little bit of, incentives to the growth side also by the decision to cut the policy rate by 100 basis points. Now, if you look at the ECF program, it was expected that growth would slow. You can't have this very tight fiscal consolidation, very tight monetary policy, and not have growth slow down. In fact, we are seeing that growth has performed better than originally projected.
On inflation rate outlook, this is what the Bank of Ghana governor had to say.
We do not expect that to lead to second round effects of, which would lead to a sort of a derailing of the disinflation process that we are seeing. So yes, our modeling team has taken that into consideration. You would notice that we have given you a range instead of a point target for the year. This is the range for 2024. At the middle of that range, I think it's about 15. So you have 15 plus or minus 2%.
The Bank of Ghana Governor Dr. Ernest Addison insists Ghana's program with the IMF is on track, rejecting arguments that more cuts are needed to help check inflation.
The original forecast for growth was 1.5%. So we are doing better than we had originally envisaged. And if you look at the path of growth, you will see that we fully recover to around 6-7% in 2026. So this is really the outlook for growth. If you take the ECF program, which I believe you would find in the staff report that has been published, you will see what the path for growth is.
In the banking sector, the governor was satisfied with development in that space, insisting all banks are in a strong position to recapitalize.
The banks have mobilized a lot of deposits. They are very liquid. There are not many avenues for investing their resources, so they are all putting it back on the auction. The economic conditions have not improved to the extent that the risks associated with lending, are reduced so that they can increase lending. And instead of lending, they are all putting those resources into short-term government bills. So we are still looking at that, I must say. It's an area that we are still discussing, and it probably did have an impact, but there's still a lot of liquidity out there. Banks that have got investment will see the government also coming in with more resources. So, Sullivan, I think that rest assured that our banks are very strong and resilient, and we don't foresee any major problems with bank capitalization in the country.
The governor of the Bank of Ghana also rejected arguments that the Ghana city has not responded to the IMF inflows.
The impact, you're saying you're not seeing the impact on the inflows on the exchange rate. Are you sure? Since January last year, the city has literally been very firm. I mean, for the 11 months of the year, we saw only a depreciation of 7%. So this is not a fixed exchange rate. But if you look at the graph, it appears as if the CD has been fixed, right? But that reflects, some of the improved external sector conditions, the improvement in the current account balance, the improvement in the foreign exchange buffers of the central bank, and then the emergence of confidence in the economy, and therefore the currency has remained relatively stable. At least we are not seeing the very high depreciation that you were seeing in 2022. Remember, the currency depreciated by over 50% in 2022. Now this year we are looking at 7.
Dr. Ernest Addison also disclosed that based on the fresh inflows from the IMF, Ghana's international reserves has now crossed the over $6 billion mark.
Banking consultant Nana Champon says the action by the Bank of Ghana is in the right direction.
Economic capital is depending on the economic activity that the bank wishes to undertake. And so when it comes to regulatory capital, almost every bank has got it. And those who don't have, the Financial Stability Fund is helping them, especially the state-owned banks. You know, the private ones are also getting along. I mean, they don't have problem with regulatory capital, but it's economic capital which they have problem with. So therefore, the assessment that the governor gave was right, that if you look at the DDP effect on the bank's capital, they have reversed as was expected by virtue of IFRS 9. And so almost all the banks that suffered losses have now shown profit because of the reversal of the IFRS impairment. So from the capital point of view, their assessment is that, yes, the banks are doing well on capitalization. And as I say, for regulatory capital, they've all met it. It's the economic capital that we are working on.
Do you think that this would aid in the fast recovery of these commercial banks, i.e. even the governors saying that they can even plow back their profits to shore up their capital position and all the rest? Do you think that all these things that are happening, IMF program and all the rest, would aid in a faster recovery of the banks than what we initially had feared about their position going forward?
Well, I didn't fear about their recovery at all because the impact was the DDP versus IFRS 9. And I kept saying that that was a technical loss. It wasn't a real loss. And therefore, once they reverse themselves as per the same standard, then we don't have a problem.
So what about the impact of this development on the larger economy and the outlook? My colleague George Riafe again has been engaging economist Dr. Edu Osusa-Akodie.
Well, in arriving at this policy rate, they look at they took a lot of things into consideration. They look at the global picture. The global economy is okay, except with the uncertainties in the geopolitical tensions that is bringing about the uncertainties in the fuel prices. The domestic economy is recovering, though not fully, but we know that things are pointing to the right direction. Inflation is trending downwards. That's what we call disinflation. The exchange rate has stabilized, as the governor said, around 7%. The trade T-bill rate has also declined marginally, and all these are pointing to the right direction. So they've taken them into consideration. And the two things I picked: one, that even though inflation is trending downwards, it is still high. Around 20%, 23% is way above the BOG's target of 8 plus or minus 2. So it's the reason they wanted to keep the policy rate high, to still tighten the policy rate and fight inflation.
That's all we have for you tonight on Prime Business. My name is Emma Davis. But before we go, I need you to keep watching, to keep brushing your teeth day and night with Pepsodent. With Pepsodent, every smile matters. And I leave you with international business. Have a good evening.